Firstly, welcome and thanks for joining us today. As you know, we've put the series of expert sessions together to support you coming out of lockdown now, which is great news. But we hope that you find this session and the other ones we're putting on helpful for your role as mountaineering professional. Really like to thank Plas Brenin and Loel and Dave, who will introduce themselves shortly, for putting together and running this session for you. If we can start the slide share. I suspect the majority of you are on your laptops. That will be helpful, thanks Lowell, when we come to do some annotations. And I've made a note on the chat. We'll take questions at the end, but if you have specific questions that you'd like to go to specifically to Lowell or to Dave, so one or the other, if you can type them in the chat as we go and just put a name in brackets so we know if they're directed at one or the other, that would be really helpful. Thank you for that. Then if we just go on to the next slide to put the mics on mute, and then if we can unmute them when we take the questions, obviously. And if we go on to the next slide, we're just going to have a quick practice of annotations. So let's just find out where you're all based, and I appreciate the odd person in the van. Would be interested to see where you're travelling. So most of you will be familiar, but just a reminder, if you go to the top of the screen, you should see in the green you're viewing Loel Collins' screen. To the right of that is view options. If you click on that, scroll down to annotate, click on that. Yeah, most of you know this. If you want to click on the stamp, then you have some options there, and you can place a stamp, whether it be a heart, a tick, or whatever. Put one of those in your location, and that will give us a nice overview of where we all are this morning. Yeah, you can put your name by clicking on the arrow and then clicking on the picture. So we'll just give you a few moments to practice. But part of the reason for the practice is that Loel has a slide coming up where he will be, a fishbone slide, as we call it, where he will be asking for your responses by annotation. So maybe there'll be a way you could respond in the chat, so we can capture everyone's feedback at that time. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to clear those drawings now. That's all from me, and I'd like to hand over to Loel first off, who will kick off the session. Thank you.
Lovely. Great morning, everybody. So what we're going to do is do a two-part session. First part from myself, just reporting on this study that we conducted about 2 years ago now and published recently, and then hand over to Dave to give us the perspective from a practicing coach teaching lead climbing. Now, what I've done, if you really are having difficulty sleeping, that paper will be available at the end of the piece if you want to have a read of it. And my contact details are on there as well, actually, because there's some other research falling out of this as well that if you fancy getting involved with, I might be really keen to talk to you. So that would be good. I think what we'll do is start off with some brief introductions, a wee story from me as to how the research came about, how we then did the research, then the findings of that, and then I'll hand to Dave, who will work through some of the implications for what we found for practice in the field. If that makes sense. So, brief intro from myself. I've worked in the outdoors for getting close to 40 years now. I did my MIA way back. I think I was in one of the first couple of assessments that I actually went through. My specialist area in terms of activities is actually paddle sport and skiing. However, over the last 10 years, I've been working in a research institute for a university where I've been investigating decision-making in complex environments. So that includes adventure sports, a little bit of military work, a little bit of blue light work as well in that. So I've come at this because it interested me because of my adventure sport background, but also because it was an area that I don't have a particularly high specialism in. So I'm coming at this as a little bit of a novice, if that makes some kind of sense. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, so I was one of the folks that Loel was kind of using as a guinea pig person to discuss this through with, and I was kind of been involved with this process from the beginning of his research. And for my part, I've been introducing people to climbing for over 25 years, from a kind of venture scouting level as a kid growing up in Southeast England, but with climbing parents, right through to starting work at PGL, being a chief instructor for them for a while, and then starting work at the Brenin in 2002. And I've been there kind of on and off ever since, really. I've been full time for about the last 5 years. And yeah, I mean, within that time, obviously, I've done a lot of coaching of clients and of coach education. And I kind of run all courses right through the spectrum of the kind of mountain training award schemes, and have been doing so since about sort of 2002-3, and also the coaching scheme and the fundamental scheme. And this is something that I've felt passionately about for many years, and have also been really into the idea of analysing the development of how we go about, as coaches, coach educators go about introducing people to lead climbing, and potentially how that's changed since I started working in the industry. So there you go.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Dave. Research for me is always starts with a little bit of a story, to be honest. So I'm going to start off here with a wee story. I'm actually going to start by putting the bit in that I missed. I currently now work back for PYB as their Director of Learning and Development. So this kind of research is part of my practical job. This started actually back at an MT conference. Probably 3 years ago, my office when I was at the university was based at PYB, and I took the opportunity to watch Tim Neal teaching a session on an MT conference about the technicality, the ropes and the shiny anodized bits that go with teaching lead climbing. And I thought it was a great session. And of course, with my researcher's head on, I was sitting there going, hey, but I know there's more to this. I know there's more to this than just the technicality of knots and the anodized bits and pieces. And so I went to speak just in passing to Dave Rudkin, and said, look, is there stuff around the decision-making processes and the sort of what's called the mental model, the shared approach that people use to teaching lead climbing? And he said, not that I know of. At which point I said, would it be useful to have some? And he said, yeah, it would always be useful. At which point I said, I tell you what, I'll persuade my prof to let me have some work time to go and have a dig around into this and have a look at this. So it started from that. So, from a very practical sense, research for me has to have a practical outcome, and it's got to have a value. So I've got to recognise Dave and Rudkin and Tim in this, who kind of persuaded me in their responses that there's a value to doing this. Now, what I wanted to do was to have a look at what the coaches were doing in that moment around letting the person loose on their first lead, and how they got their clients to that point, the kind of things that they were thinking about at that time. So what we did is we took what's called a mixed approach, which means there are two parts to it. And those two parts work closely together. It's a bit like triangulating on the hill, actually. So you take two bits of data, bring them together to give you a stronger set of results, i.e. your location, you know where you are. So the first part of this process has a very grand name called an Applied Cognitive Task Analysis, an ACTA. It's kind of a condensed version of a cognitive task analysis. Takes several hours to complete, but it has some key parts. And it starts by identifying the people you want to communicate with, the people you want to use as your participants, and asking them to construct a task diagram of whatever it is you're looking at. In this case, lead climbing. So we ask people to give quite a bit of thought to the process they follow whilst they're progressing somebody to lead climbing, to letting them loose lead climb. And that then lands with me as the researcher, and I then conduct a series, a big interview with them that starts off by conducting what's called a knowledge audit. Where did they find the information? How did they get the information that they were building their task diagram on? So we're kind of putting colour into the picture, as it were. And then the kind of the meaty bit is a whole series of questions at the end, which are sort of what if questions. Where do people struggle in this process? How do people make regular mistakes? What are the challenges that you face on a regular basis? And so we sort of dig deeper and deeper into that person's understanding of teaching lead climbing. The way I like thinking of this, it's like blowing on an ember in a fire. You're kind of using the interview to just put some breath onto that ember, so the ember gradually grows until it bursts into flame, at which point you're getting some lovely data to kind of get your teeth into. So we did that with 7 people who were very experienced teachers of lead climbing from different geographical locations. And we got a series of results from that we then used to construct a survey. That survey, the intention was then present that at the next MT conference to MIAs, MICs, and other people who were regularly teaching lead climbing. And we asked them to prioritise the findings from the first part to give them a value. The idea being that we can have a look at the coherence of the approach that's being taken. So we can see whether everybody's taking a completely different approach or whether everybody tends to be taking a very similar approach. And from that, it tells you what actually you might then want to make sure you include in a training program for people who you were teaching to teach lead climbing. We've got a really good response rate and a really good completion rate, actually, which makes it work. We then did some funky analysis called an ANOVA, which basically tells us whether things are significant in those results or not. Then we had a set of results, which we can then present, which we put into the paper. Here are the results. So what we discovered from this process was that everybody was aiming to generate an independent lead climber. Now, this is probably pretty sensible to all of us because we have worked in adventure sports settings, and independence to us seems really, really logical. It's the capacity of that individual to operate without us being there. In a coaching sense, every coach tries to generate independence, but in our sense, it truly is independence, isn't it, at the sharp end. So what we also discovered is that everybody takes quite a holistic view to that climber. So there wasn't really any single crucial factor that was absolutely essential. It was a combination of all those things. And in fact, it was a combination that was sort of the sum being greater than the value of the parts. So each bit in isolation is nice and lovely, but it's the fact that they come together in a very particular way. And that was important because it told us that there was a very subtle difference between what sport climbing lead climbing teachers were teaching and what trad sport climbing teachers were teaching. So what we discovered, interestingly, was that it's really important that the coach considers the fluency of the movement over the surface. Now, this is important. It wasn't so specific to the grade, it was much more to do with the likelihood of that person slipping off the surface that they were on, i.e. they were moving confidently and skillfully across the surface. And that was a safety management thing, but it was also an indication perhaps of whether that individual had some capacity left to be able to learn whilst they were in that lead climbing context. Linked closely to that was a fluency with rope skills. And you know, this included the top and the bottom of the pitch, or the individual pitch being considered. But what it also included was the fluency of handling the rope as they were climbing, clipping ropes into runners, clipping runners to protection, and the like. And there was a general feeling from the whole team that these things needed to be fluent, they needed to be slick, skillful in their application, so that this wasn't getting in the way of other parts of the process. What we also discovered is that there was a particular attention paid to the quality of the protection, placement, location of it, choice of it. And this was particular to the adventure sports coaches, but not exclusive to the adventure sports coaches. The sport climbing coaches did pay attention to the protection, actually, because it's in situ gear, which is engineered, but there was still some attention paid to how that was going to fit in with the line of the route, but also the security, because not everything is perfect all the time. The other bit that was very specific to the adventure sports climbers in particular, because of the natural environment they were in, as opposed to the manufactured environment that we see in climbing walls, or the manufactured safety that we see on sports climbs, was this idea of situational awareness. And that was paying attention to the route, that was paying attention to the environment that you were climbing in, being able to understand what was going on, and also to anticipate what that was going to do to the climber as they were moving up past gear, for instance. This was an interesting point as well for us, is that the crucial element of here seemed to be that safety was managed as you would do in a lead climbing situation, i.e. the person about to learn to lead climb had to be able to operate independently, but they were clearly part of a pair. So the primary safety was achieved by the belayer. And that meant that as you were teaching people to lead climb, they had to be taught how to belay to a lead climber as well, as opposed to just top roping. And there was particular attention here, and this was quite interesting, because all that idea of the rope work and having potentially to clip onto somebody who's having a bit of a jibber above a runner, actually there was only one incident of anybody ever having to do that. And the discussions drew out the fact that the prime safety comes from that rope to the lead climber and the gear that they were clipping to. So that was important. That perhaps suggests that we're going to have people being coached in pairs. There's an individualized element here, clearly, because there's a lead climber, but there's also the need to consider the lead climber and their partner as a pair when being coached. So the belayer learns to anticipate, learns to pay out when it's required, and learns to lock off when it's required. The two bits that were interesting for me is that there was a particular attention to ensuring that the lead climber had the capacity to learn whilst they were having their first experiences of leading, i.e. they had a cognitive space. So they had the capacity to learn whilst they were in that situation. And that was quite interesting. That means that the new climber has to be well within their capacity and has to be able to take on board and process new information. And that means the route choice and selection of letting people that loose for that first time is really a very sophisticated decision. You have to know your client very well. You have to have a certain sort of emotional intelligence to understand where they are, what they're doing, what they're likely to behave like when they get to the front end. And that reflected the last point in here, which was that this capacity to manage the stresses of being at the front end. So they needed a set of strategies to be able to handle the crucial cognitive factors of being above that runner and potentially falling. What I'd like to do is to get you guys to use your annotation. And on the fish bones of this, it would be really interesting if you could place a number on the value that you place on these different ribs on the fish bone. The independent climbing and the holistic are constant. We're pretty comfortable with that. But it would be really interesting to see the numbers that you guys place on this, actually, almost as a third point in this little bit of research. So if I give you a couple of minutes to do that, can you give that a go? Have a look at them, have a think, folks.
It's looking good, that Loel.
I've got somebody drawing a pair of glasses. Is that right?
Yeah.
If people are not sure, if you go to the text option and then click on that in the area, then you can potentially use your keyboard and add numbers that way, if that helps with some people.
Yeah, okay.
Alex is writing us a list on the chat, I think, at the moment as well.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
I'll add Alex's for you.
Okay. Great. Hey, look, that's really interesting, actually, because that works really nicely. We'll leave that playing away. So what we discovered is that there is a reasonably coherent shared mental model amongst people who are teaching lead climbing. And this is actually a little bit of a novelty, because the training tends to focus on the technicality and not perhaps on some of the details that people are putting in. So it's quite surprising that there's a shared mental model amongst everybody, because when we look at this in other sports, those shared mental models aren't there. And those coaches frequently are just doing what they're told by their governing body in tennis, table tennis or football or the like. So there's this lovely thing that this shared mental model has emerged. And where we think this has come from is the fact that adventure sports coaches have to have an ability in their activity, because we're on the adventure with the client. It's not like running a foot rugby pitch from the sideline with a clipboard and a whistle. And so actually we develop this common view of the important bits of teaching lead climbing, which is lovely. And this overlaps with another piece of research that we've done recently that is stressing the importance of being a practitioner in the activity that you're coaching in adventure sports, much more so than we see in other sports. And this is quite, we've probably known this for some time, but actually this is the second study that is showing this kind of evidence. You have to be a practitioner before you develop as a coach. And that's not to say you have to be a super hard climber, but it does mean that you need to be independently capable and safe in the environment that you're working in. So it's lovely. I'm going to take some notes for that, actually, because there's some more data there that I need to get out more. But there's some more stuff in here that I can play with. There we go. See, I'm all excited about that now. Brilliant.
Love the data.
Yeah. So the trick now is, unless there's some burning questions, Cressida, that have come for this, I can hand to Dave for him to put his slant on it. We're okay? Okay, Dave, I'm going to hand over to you.
I'm going to have to get you to hand over the slides for me here, Loel. Thanks very much.
No problem.
I mean, firstly, thanks very much to Loel for letting me be part of the research that he's been doing. And I mean, it's been a pleasure to be involved in it. And thanks very much to all of you for participating in today as well. It's the first chance I think Loel's had to present this back, or any of us indeed, to present this back to people that are practitioners and coach educators. You know, we've got a lot of experience in this room, in this chat room, whatever we want to call this, Zoom webinar. Do bear with me, it's the first time I've done one of these things, so I'm kind of reading to make sure that I don't massively overrun, because I could also waffle on about this for hours, as most of you know anyway. So, I mean, it has been a pleasure being able to be involved in the ongoing discussions relating to the judgment and decision making, which Loel's already alluded to, in a bigger picture. And it's always fascinated me in our sort of dynamic, or in Loel's words, hyper-dynamic environment that we work in. For all of us in this meeting, we can take messages from this on two levels, I think, both for our own sort of coaching at maybe a more sophisticated level, and the implications to our education of other coaches and instructors that are starting out on their journey of doing this for themselves, teaching others. From my perspective, being part of Loel's study and the discussions that it's triggered have really helped me gather some thoughts that I've been having for well over a decade now at work, that sort of surround, I mean, a lot of this is to do with the situational awareness. When combined with kind of ongoing practical observations that I've made over 25 years, really, of introducing a varied client group to climbing in all its different forms, I've seen interesting threads with, like, and it's worth highlighting across the range of professionals operating or aspiring to operate in the field. It's impossible for us to deal with this work area without discussing the monumental changes that have happened within our sport, and the consequent ground shift in the demographic of society who now choose to engage with it, and the massive increase in numbers of people that we're dealing with. It has had a huge impact on the way that we teach and introduce people to something that is still fundamentally pretty dangerous activity, particularly when dealing with traditional climbing. Can we switch slide there, Loel? So I've highlighted this as situational awareness and its importance. And I mean, the way that I've sort of outlined this, and I've been outlining this more in recent times, is that it's easy for an experienced climber or coach to assess whether a client can place a bit of gear appropriately or tie a clove hitch. But it's an entirely different question to establish whether they've got the knowledge and genuine understanding and acceptance of the real risk associated with trad climbing. I mean, obviously outdoor sport climbing is different to indoor sport climbing. More judgment is required. It is a sliding scale. But when we're introducing people to trad climbing, it's a fundamentally completely different activity. In modern climbing terms, trad climbing is a complex activity requiring constant dynamic decision making, often in stressful situations, which does require a certain level of risk acceptance and awareness and a desire to engage with that. And this has to have an impact on our approach to how we introduce lead climbing to novices or to newbies to leading. And I will look at some practical case studies in a minute. I've put this thing about unconscious bias here. I think it's vital that we're all aware of our own unconscious biases, hopefully making them conscious, that are inevitably present from our own introduction to and pathway through our climbing and our instructional careers. Everyone in this meeting will probably have a slightly different image of what climbing actually is to them, and that will change. You know, for me, it almost changes daily, I would say. And over an entire career, what you're specialising in, the bits and pieces that you're focusing on at each individual time, be that bouldering or big wall climbing, they require different focus, don't they? And it's really important that we're aware of that, because of the idea that we're not trying to kind of, I mean, we must put the client that we're working with, the individualization that Loel's talked about there, at the center of this, and not our own current motivations. there will inevitably be a generational issue at play here as climbing's transformed from a more trad sort of mountaineering based activity that people specifically chose to engage with because of that, to the vast number of people that are now engaging in a more gymnastic activity that is so much more stage managed, as Loel has already alluded to, in a kind of indoor or bouldering type environment. And as I've said, you know, coaching is all about putting the client at the centre. And I've used that rubber stamping phrase at the bottom here because we must make sure that we're not rubber stamping our personal vision of climbing onto a client who has such a vast range of options available to them. And again, you know, we're trying to maximise participation and retention here and keeping people engaged with climbing, hopefully for life. I don't know whether that's a bit of a hippie thing to say, but the point about this is that if we are trying to engage people like that, we're not going to maximise engagement by just telling people what climbing should be to them. It's more like helping them discover what their journey through climbing is going to be. And that, I mean, particularly before we start encouraging them to engage in traditional lead climbing, setting an example that we're going to expect them to be, you know, independent at doing that. Next slide, please, Loel. Just a few, a couple of slides worth to try and put this into context. Firstly, some historical things. A bit of a laugh to start off with. I've put Brailsford, late 70s, Spotty Crag at back when. A lot of people, I would imagine, in this meeting will at some point have been to the notorious Spotty Crag up in the trees above Lion Rock. John Brailsford used to work at Plas Brenin back then, and he was the one that painted the spots on the crag, apparently. And I remember on my own SPA training, Chris Forrest telling me about John's approach to teaching climbing, which back then involved flaking some ropes out of the bottom of the crag, tying the novice climbers onto the top end of the rope, giving them some rack and saying, get up there. And of course, the amount of rack that it got was relatively limited. And he just said, well, I'll run round to the top. When you get to the top, I'll teach you how to build a belay. Now, I'd imagine some of you are probably sucking air through your teeth at that. But we have to think of this in the sort of context of the time. Because, of course, to him, that was a progression, wasn't it? That was the start of a pathway that got to Cloggy or Gogarth or Ben Nevis in winter or North Faces in the Alps. He's training the next generation of that kind of mountaineer. And that was an approach. And it did have a logical start point. It's just very different to the nature of what we do today. I mean, I'd hate to think, who knows, that story may have been a bit embellished. But yeah, thank you for that, Alex. It is exactly, that's the same now. I mean, I mentioned my own SPA training, which I actually did in 2000 at Plas Brenin with Chris. And I remember leading Fallen Block Crack at Tremaddock at the beginning of the day in my trainers in the rain. And by the time I actually started working at Plas Brenin in 2002, we were already starting to discuss whether that was the sort of appropriate course of action to take on day one of an SPA training with clients we didn't really know. And everybody was thinking about levels of care, duty of care, how well we knew the clients. And the way that we were managing it was definitely changing. You can see a progression in our approach as instructors and coaches. And when I was working on the rock course program in 2002, it was really common for us to have intro rock students lead climbing for the Thursday and the Friday in their first week of trad climbing. You know, with us swinging around on a static line next door to them. And I think the other thing that's quite an interesting observation is that we would quite often be getting the rope to the top of routes by soloing. And these things are definitely things that you see less and less these days. And I would say the modern day standards for developing lead climbers, I mean, the amount of mechanisms that we employ as instructors and coaches to have a higher level of care for longer before we actually remove the umbilical cord of a top rope from people and actually let them lead has shifted a lot in the last 18 years. There are a lot more things at play there to keep folks safe, because we do have to reflect on the fact that in rock climbing, the difference between somebody having a rope above their head and not having a rope above their head is a sudden, huge change. That isn't a sliding scale. And yes, we can get next to somebody on a jugging line, but it still doesn't remove the fact they're not on a top rope anymore. Next slide, please, Noel. A few little anecdotes that I thought I'd throw in for a bit of interest, and also, I mean, there's some contrast, I think, to these points. The first one that always sticks in my mind, these are all in about the last 8 years. The first one that sticks in my mind was a 16-year-old girl on a performance climbing summer camp who spent the last 3 days of her second week of proper trad climbing, leading every day, with me swinging next to her on a rope. And for the last 2 days, she was leading multi-pitch mountain E1 climbs. And a lot of people would look at that and go, that sounds pretty pushy. But firstly, she was an incredibly strong climber because she was a British bouldering, like youth bouldering champion. And she was incredibly aware of the situation she was in, the risks involved in trad climbing, and all of the elements that Loel's mentioned in his fishbone diagram were in abundance. And she had so much in hand on a route of that grade that she could hang around off a finger lock on an E1, fiddling in gear, and I could leave it to it. And it was an entirely appropriate thing to do with that person at that time. Conversely to that, really talented female climber on a full month rock developer course that I was running a few years ago, who had a massive introduction to climbing indoors and decided to come to us for a month to find out about outdoor climbing. And after the first week of top roping, seconding and sport climbing, bouldering, she basically came to me and just said, don't want to do trad, I'm not interested. I love seconding it, but I'm just not going to be a lead climber. And I must admit, I spent the rest of the course gently nudging her, not pushily, but sort of, you sure you don't want to have a go at this? And I've stayed in touch with her since. This was probably 5 years ago, and she still doesn't trad climb, but she has an amazing career as a boulderer. She's a very good boulderer and sport climber. I mean, a little example here of a slightly different duty of care to a much more experienced climber is somebody taking multiple falls on boulder sport climbs, because he'd been on a couple of courses with me before. I knew the guy very well, and he was basically an E2 or 3 trad climber who basically just couldn't fall off, whether it was on gear or bolts. He would always back off, even in a really safe place where he could have just jumped into space, and he needed to progress his climbing. He needed to do that. And of course, we make that decision, don't we, with strong clients in an appropriate place. His situational awareness and his risk evaluation were really, really well tuned in. It was almost like he needed somebody to just tell him he was going to be okay. And then the last example at the totally opposite end of this spectrum was 4 people on a 3-week rapid development course who all wanted to do their SPA, then SPA training. And not a single one of them actually led a single route, even easy route, until halfway through the last week of the course, because the starting point they'd come from, their acceptance of risk and their general situational knowledge and awareness was such that they needed much, much closer supervision. And we didn't actually take them off the top rope. And in fact, I think one of them maybe only led 1 pitch on the very last day. And all of them gave great feedback and were really happy with the way they'd been looked after and progressed through the course. So, you know, an interesting contrast. Hopefully you can see why I've thrown those examples in there. And last slide, please, Long. I mean, my conclusions from this that I kind of wanted to share with all of you, and also some stuff for everybody, people like yourselves in this room specifically, to give us a bit of thought and a bit of feedback on. When you read the conclusions of Loel's work, and honestly, it is actually very interesting. I would like to suggest that it would be good for you all to read it. It doesn't just send you to sleep. I enjoyed it. And I've got the attention span of a grasshopper. I would say the first thing that's really heartening is that Loel's findings suggested that we are doing a pretty good job, and that to some extent, and I'm going to talk about that a bit, but to some extent, that has happened in a fairly ad hoc fashion that is due to our incredible communication between each other as an industry, between our associations, our friends we work with. The social aspect of coaches and coaching proved to be the catalyst for people's development, you know. the conclusion does offer thoughts on the processes that we've got in place. And that is a lot of what they are, workshops, and it's sort of happening by a process of osmosis to an extent. But the fact that there's a sort of lack of formal pedagogical training in this area. Now, this is something that I think I've not come to any specific conclusions on, and I'm going to question this in a second. I mean, the process is kickstarted for most people thus far in the outdoor industry by their MCI training. Now, you could argue that it starts at the very first day that that person starts to learn to want to be an independent lead climber themselves, because of course you're forming practices, aren't you, from that stage onwards. But in terms of formally thinking about turning a newbie climber into somebody who can competently second a route to then lead independently, that is something we do a lot of an introduction on in the content of the first 4 days on an MCI training course. And, there'll be practical sessions and classroom sessions there. The addition of the RCDI may have an impact in this area anyway, because it is going to increase the amount of available training. It's going to increase the amount of available training to people, but it's not at the moment an inherent part of the MCI scheme. So it may have an impact. We've got to see how that settles down. Maybe people will do the RCDI then the MCI, or maybe a lot of people will carry on just going in at MCI. So the question that I'm going to ask you guys, and this isn't something to answer straight away, but it's something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, is, is there a need, is there appetite for a further CPD module beyond what we've currently got, that is beyond the MCI training, possibly even something that would be available to, these are my thoughts, RCDI assessed people or MCI assessed people who are intending on going out and doing a lot of lead coaching, because of course there are an awful lot of people. It is a rock climbing development instructor. It's not just a lead supervising award. And the MCI is a mountaineering and climbing instructor. It's not a multi-pitch lead supervising award. So maybe it would be the kind of thing that would be a module beyond people's assessment courses, or between training and assessment, that we could put together. Because I've been thinking about the content, and I'd be interested to know what everybody thinks. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that has proved some useful food for thought, because that's sort of where I've gone with a lot of what Loel's work produced in my sort of thought process, really. Thank you very much.
So I'm working on the basis that there'll be some questions in the chat, Cressida, which we can deal with.
Not hundreds in the chat, but maybe if we open it up. Just reading one, actually, beg your pardon, from Alex, which I'll just read out if that's okay. The last point on the previous slide, in brackets SPA, RCI, also highlights the importance of recognising people's motivations, as well as balancing our wishes to rubber stamp people as fluent climbers rather to qualification baggers. So I'm not sure if Alex is able to add to that, or if it's the question.
Come on, Alex, say something.
Hey, yeah, sorry, yeah, we're on the move. Can you hear me? Yeah, so I guess it comes back to what you were talking about, the guys who, from our point of view, are maybe trying to rush through an SPA by, only doing 3 weeks of climbing and wanting then to be leading severe comfortably, it's a sort of wanting to bag their qualification. And it's definitely important for us as coaches to recognise that that may be the motivation for somebody, and we shouldn't really argue with that motivation, but it may be very important for us to then balance out the sort of wish for us to stamp someone as a, we want you to go climbing all the time, over, well, I just need a qualification for my job. There's that sort of importance there as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Alex. And I think the thing is, it's the level of the RCI is as it is. That's the level you have to perform at. It's not, you're not making a value judgment beyond that, are you?
Yeah.
I think there's an important bit here, and that is that I don't think anything in our findings suggested that you needed to be a a hard climber, or that you needed to kind of eat and breathe climbing.
Yeah, absolutely.
What it suggested to us, and this is aligns with probably 30 other bits of research that we did, is that the unique aspect of being an adventure sports coach is that you do require a level of skill to be skillfully independent in the environment that you're working in. So if that standard is set as severe, that person needs to be skillful on severe. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be climbing at E1 so that it's within their grade, although that is a way of doing it. But an individual, providing they are skillful in the environment that they are working in, that's the crucial bit. And the background to that is that there's a certain amount of cognitive effort goes into physically performing, and that we all have a set capacity. And if it's occupied in performing yourself, it can't be spent on the client. And so the level of your own performance has to be at a skillful, autonomous level, is what the science would describe it as, so that you can pay particular attention to the needs of your client in that situation. That's the way I'd look at that kind of comment. So they don't have to be hard climbers, but they do have to be skillful in the environment.
It's interesting, Loel. Sorry, can I just, because I mean, there's a couple of points have been raised. I'm just trying to read through the chat and keep up with it a bit. But I totally agree with that. I mean, I think the thing is that as the level of the award goes up, the level of people's sort of in their autonomous skill and their ability to look after folk, and the necessity for that increases in this like at the same time, doesn't it? And the more serious the environment, the more able that person has to be, and current as well. So yeah, absolutely. It's not about being a hard climber, it's about being competent at the standard. Are you picking some other things out of here, Chris?
Well, I'm just wondering, I don't know if Mehmet wanted to add to the conversation. Mehmet, if you're here, I know he's...
Hi, can you see
He raises a really good point here.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I was saying, I've heard lots about the RCDI training, partially from Al Harewood, who's been sort of chatting to other providers. And I'm an MCI, have been for a few years now, but I've always thought that I've been tempted to do the RCDI training, not the assessment, but just the training, purely because I've heard because you have 5 days focusing purely on lead climbing, as opposed to all the other parts done with MCI training. And I've heard that the RCDI training involves more training on the softer side, not just the technical skills of how to jug next to someone. And yeah, my point was basically, I think there could be demand for a CPD module, because personally I've been tempted to just do the RCDI training as CPD, despite being a MCI. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really good point, that it's a crossover, isn't it? There's a lot more time spent on an RCDI training dealing with all of the elements of teaching and coaching lead climbing than we'll ever have time to do within that first half of an MCI training course, because it is one of the specifics of the award, isn't it? So I mean, I wonder whether that's where the module will fit. It's a good point. Yeah. Thank you.
And the other point is, when you do your MCI training, as everybody knows, there's so much information going on. It feels a bit like information overload. And
absolutely.
Once you've been working with these things for a few years, and then you go back and do some more training on it and dedicate some time to it, you're going to pick up the much more subtle points, and you'll probably get a lot more out of the training as well. But
right.
Then again, after the CPD, so I don't know if everybody will feel the same.
That is definitely just I mean, to support that a little bit, there's definitely something that I've been thinking, is that because although we do cover it quite early in the course so that everybody's reasonably fresh, it is a massive volume of information in one 9-day course. And so, you know, watching people going through the MCI training, I do sympathise with the fact that it was one of the things I think I really sympathise with, is the fact that you know, it's part of a massive volume rather than the focus, isn't it? So yeah, thanks for that.
That's okay.
Can you hear me? Just the lead climbing element side of things, you know, working with candidates on the workshops and things like that. You're working with people who are at a standard, sometimes below it, sometimes above it, but usually hovering in the middle somewhere. And that's just taking people multi-pitch climbing and introducing people to, you know, becoming competent seconds and things like that. And that fills their cup fully. So the thought of some of those people then going out teaching lead climbing can be pretty scary. And on an assessment, it's not super common for candidates to be assessed, is it, Dave, on teaching lead climbing, because you just haven't had the time with the clients to assess them as to whether or not that's relevant or not. So I think the idea of CPD for teaching lead climbing would be ace. You know, even very simple things like when instructors start talking about taking people out and teaching them how to lead climb, particularly trainees, I get really scared because at no one point will they talk about focusing on that person's movement. And the other key thing is whether their belayer is actually belaying. So when you ask them, so what about the other person? It's like, oh, well, what do I need to know? And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you need to know? You know, it's obvious. Obviously nothing's obvious, but that idea that, yeah, we really need to help people if they're going to start doing stuff like that. It's potentially really dangerous. I mean, it can't be that bad because hopefully we're not having accidents. You know, we're not seeing that, are we? So it always comes down to that in my head sometimes when I put my worry monster head on. When you actually look at the stats, it can't be that bad because we don't hear of anybody hurting people, which is ace. But yeah.
Sorry, I've got a question for you. Have you actually read have you had a chance to read Loel's work?
No, not yet. I will do though.
Because an interesting thing. It would be really good for you to read it. And I mean, this obviously goes for everybody. I'm not just specifying yourself. But my point about Loel's work suggesting that we're actually doing a pretty good job already is actually quite heartening, because the shared mental model that he talks about, if you read the piece, you'll sort of see elaborates on that quite a lot. Is that in the work that he did, it basically showed that by hook or by crook, everybody's been mentored and done their own background work, and everybody's basically ended up coming to the same shared mental model of the process and the person. And that is, I mean, the thing is, it says a lot for everybody, for all of us lot, and the way that we work. But I kind of agree that I feel like maybe there's a transition phase, isn't there? As you develop from post-assessment to being an experienced lead climbing coach. And that maybe is where we could do with some sort of intervention.
Yeah. I think one of the other things, I'm going to be brutally honest here, is I think there's a lot of stuff that's got away with because the system isn't tested.
Yeah.
So I see, as you do, Dave, some pretty scary stuff out there, but because the system's not tested, accidents don't happen. So I think we've got to be careful about sort of patting ourselves on the back and thinking it's great, because I think sometimes we're lucky, because I've certainly seen stuff, like I say, and I'm sure you have, out and about at crags, and you're like, oh my God, if something bad happens now, i.e. somebody falling off, it's going to be terminal. But what happens is nobody falls off. And I mean that from a coaching point of view as well. So I'm not just talking about people out climbing for themselves. I mean about watching other professionals or whatever, or trainees, you know, doing stuff where you're like, whoa, hang on a minute. So I think that, yeah, you just got to be careful with that side of things. I'm not sure about, it's not, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
No, I get your point. Don't start to retract it, Sam. That's it's a good point.
From my side there, the intention wasn't to measure the effectiveness of teaching lead climbing. What we were after initially was to look at whether there was a coherent model between the people who were teaching it a lot. The effectiveness of teaching lead climbing would be a second thing, third thing to look at, if anybody's interested.
If I could just come in, if that's possible, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of the learners that we're now dealing with, and the time lag between when we did our training, what we were taught, what was current then, to compared to the people coming in to learn to lead from maybe a different background, in from the walls rather than from the mountains and so on, and the kind of shocking change of audience that we now are faced with when trying to teach people to lead climb. So I think
Totally different.
Yeah, like you're getting people with really good movement skills because they may be coming from a bouldering or a wall climbing background, different aspects of fear because they can't climb above 5 meters without feeling uncomfortable, but they'll do it without a rope. You know, those kinds of audience changes. And I suppose CPD would be really useful to address that time lag between when we trained and the audience then compared to the audience now, but equally the 21st century learner that wants to do a course and get quickly skilled to be independent, and the need for time for that independence to happen. It's not just 40 hours of climbing, but it's 40 hours of climbing maybe spaced out over a year, which would work better. And the other key thing, I'll get it all in one go, I suppose, is the importance of belaying. So by the time you get them to lead climbing, there's an assumption of skill in how they belay, but obviously I think hopefully the likes of rock skills, the very early training that they get might start to recognize the importance of different types of belaying. So the novice, the lead climber, and so forth, which often gets forgotten because they're now there to lead, and the focus has moved away from what's seen as fundamental skills of belaying, when in reality holding the rope is not just what they're doing. Which by the time they come to lead, that's what often they feel. You just told that, you're a novice, you belay me up there and I'll not fall off. So I do think there's a few things in that evolution that we need to kind of come back.
Jane, sorry, can I get Loel to just switch back to my little timeline slide? Because it's interesting. I mean, you've highlighted something that I was kind of trying to highlight by putting that in there, really. But we've only got a limited amount of time. But this, I mean, what you're picking up on is what I would.
I think James' point is really important. That significance of the belay.
Can I just finish my? Sorry, because the crucial thing here for me was the idea that what Jane's saying, and I fundamentally completely agree, is that probably most of us in this meeting came into climbing sometime at the top end of this image, and the point about Brailsford and his approach to teaching climbing, you know, we can suck air through our teeth all we like, but that was appropriate to what was a fundamentally much, much more dangerous sport. And the person that chose to engage with it was fundamentally different. And there were a lot less people. The demographic of society that engaged with climbing was very, very different to what I then experienced in 2000 when I started working at the Brenin, 2002. And that's very different. And I mean, absolutely, Jane, couldn't be more different to now, where, I mean, people coming out of a totally stage managed environment, like an indoor climbing center where they've learned to boulder and then lead climb on a surface that is manufactured with a load of decisions that have basically been made for them, and transferring that into an adventure sport environment where everything they do from the moment they leave the car is about judgment and decision making. And that situational awareness area that I've sort of focused on here is absolutely critical, because their understanding of climbing as a risk-based sport is a totally different thing, isn't it? I mean, I think I couldn't agree with you more there. People who come out of climbing walls climb incredibly well, but an awful lot of them can climb themselves into a lot of trouble, but yet not have any of the kind of awareness of what they're exposing themselves to get out of it if anything goes wrong. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Can I just following on from the questions and from Jane there, it does take time. That's the challenge here. So we find ourselves setting X number of routes, X number of days between training and assessments. Frequently, the way of enhancing that isn't necessarily to just increase that time. It's to give the candidate the skills so they make the most from that experience. And when we have very, very congested curriculums that are full of knot tying and the like, one of the things that we might overlook and perhaps should consider is teaching people how to maximize that time between training and assessment so that they can learn independently of us, but also independently of their mentor or the person who's helping them through that process. So there's almost a need for how to learn kind of session. We discuss this on the academic side as what are called learnacy skills, like numeracy and literacy skills, but of learning. And there are some really clear ways we can maximize that time if that's felt to be important.
That is crucial. It's a brilliant idea. I mean, there's no doubt in looking at the people that we've sort of been mentoring through schemes that there's a difference in different people who take different lessons out of the experiences they gain. So, yeah, brilliant.
Dave, just going back slightly, with my role up for AMI, I've definitely seen a shift in what people want for CPD, and it is much more based around coaching. If I go for the past 2 AGMs, coaching workshops have all been full, but the next AGM, that's what people are asking for. So I think there's a definite space there to be filled.
Thanks for that, Pete.
I think as well, sorry to keep talking now, I said I wouldn't. I think some of the background training, the fundamental training that people are now have opportunity to get into will help free up some of the syllabi content if we're just talking about that, but equally free up some of the skills training for people that want to learn to lead for themselves. You know, that there's opportunity to get that groundwork solid, so then they can move properly because we've got good coaching. They can place gear, they can do ropes, and they understand the systems from very early days. There's less bad habit intervention required. So yeah, and I will stop now.
Oh, lovely, thanks, Jane.
Brilliant.
Loel and David agreed very kindly to stay online for a couple more minutes. So if there are any other questions, now's your chance, folks, to jump in and either write them down. Rob has just written a question. Where do you take your studies next, Loel?
Oh, this is the fun thing, is you do a bit of research and it just asks loads more questions. For me, because I'm a decision-making specialist, the bit I'm particularly interested in is in situational awareness, because if you understand situational awareness, that's what drives all the decisions we make in adventure. So I've currently got a study just starting with a bunch of sea kayaking guides, where we're looking at how you would develop their situational understanding in the sea environment, which is basically like working in winter continually. And what we find is that we have a series of questions that seem to be very effectively moving people from a simple description of the situation that they're in into a comprehension of the situation, what's causing the situation that they're in, and then also the ability to project it and think forward. So what's going to happen at this location in the next half an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, 24 hours. So that's where I'm going to go next, is to have a look at how those questions might work in a climbing situation.
Thank you. Just to remind people, we will make the research available. Loel has a limited capacity of papers that he's number that he's allowed to share the paper with. It's not just a complete freebie, we're afraid, but we will make that available once the recording has been edited for you. Just scanning the chat, see any other questions before we wrap up.
There are a couple of points that have just come up, aren't there?
Do you want to respond to those, Dave?
I'm just reading. Sorry, there's quite a lot of words in Pete's point here. Brailsford's approach is Darwinian in the context of skilled students. Oh, whoa. Would Pete like to speak about this point? Because I think it's probably really good. Is he there? Hi, Pete. How you doing?
Hi. Yeah.
Could you sort of précis that for everyone?
Well, yeah, I think we have to be quite careful when we, condemn, or more or less condemn, whole areas of approach, you might say, because I think the context is the all, and it depends on the individuals involved and the types of terrain we're on, and their development plan. And the other thing is, bearing in mind, I think if you think about your own climbing experiences, there's always a balance of risks, on a good day out, let's say, or a good climb, there's a balance of risks. I'm not suggesting that as, instructors, we should be promoting the idea that, sailing close to the wind is a good idea, particularly. It'll happen anyway type thing. But I wouldn't like to promote the idea that you mustn't move an inch unless everything's completely nailed down and we've practiced it 100 times. Because I think the climbing skill in the end will rely on that level of perception and control of risk. And I suppose I'd like to work safely, obviously, but I don't like to remove, let's say, all decision making. I like to operate, but not dangerously, I would say, but operate with a certain frisson, and obviously to stay in touch with what's happening and interacting and monitoring and work in different ways. Anyway, the whole context of that for me means that sometimes different things seem acceptable on different occasions, you might say. And I struggle with the idea of going, oh, you must never do this, or that was dangerous because somebody wasn't doing whatever at that point.
There are so many. I mean, you'll notice that I've strategically completely avoided talking about the massive array of technical things that you could do to supervise or introduce somebody to lead climbing, because every single one of those things, from literally standing on the ground and saying off you go and letting somebody lead, to soloing alongside somebody on a mountain route and looking at their runners, to swinging alongside them on a static line, to literally having them on a slack top rope, are all appropriate at some point. And I totally agree. The thing is that it's a sliding scale of a level of care appropriate to the people and what you're trying to achieve with them, isn't it? I sincerely hope you didn't feel like I was demonizing the Darwinian Brailsford approach, because that's definitely not what I was doing. What I was doing was saying it was A, of its time, and B, he's training certain people to end in a certain place. And you'd have to be there watching, wouldn't you? We can't wind the clock back to the 1970s.
No.
There is a crucial point here, is that the fundamental decision that we always make is a risk-benefit decision. And the reason that we have people make learning to lead climb is because it's a benefit to them, or learning to scramble, or learning to climb in general. And so when you chase back all the decision making, the first decision really is, will the potential benefit of this activity to this client outweigh the risk? And that comes back to the situational awareness, because to understand that, we've got to have that attention to the situational, what are called the situational demands, which is the awareness, but also the client or the student within that setting. So in general, overall, it's about picking the right tool at the right place at the right time for the right job, understanding that there's got to be an authentic level of risk here. So I don't think removing the risk, that it doesn't do anybody any favours at all.
Can I just get Alan to contribute here just briefly to finish this off, because it is an interesting addition to what Pete's just said. I think I've just read his comment. Are you there, Alan?
Hi there, folks.
Sorry, that's quite a lot of words on the screen. But the point could you just highlight the point you're making there, please, Alan? Is that all right?
Yeah, I mean, I just
you know, in the time that I've been involved, there's generally been a focus towards sort of technical skills and things, and that's often the case in other avenues that I've been in around sporting activities as well, and in different outdoor adventurous activities as well. But for me going forward, I would like to see more of this kind of discussion that was outlined in the model here. And I think for us as practitioners, opportunities like this where at the end of this session there's still a real appetite to discuss all these different avenues we can go off down in terms of how we prepare and support people. So you know, all this the issues of a kind of compressed programs that we have just to get through the technical competence things often. You know, the more we can open things out to continue development, and some of the figures that are interesting for me in my job role are the sort of drop-offs that we have. So we invest in people developing leadership skills, and then there's quite a low retention rate for people beyond a certain point. So that to me points towards the benefits of continuing professional development and workshop types approaches, so that people can continue to explore some of these avenues, because however much we try, we'll never fit it into a training course and all that sort of thing. So it's just some points to make, really.
I think that's really good, Alan. That's really good observation, Alan. And when we look at coaching programs in other sports and leadership programs in other sports, we find that when the curriculum becomes too congested, it kind of obliges the trainers to be very sort of didactic in their training. You know, this is how you do it, and you give the impression that there's then a copy. What you do to pass is to copy what you were demonstrated at training course. So I think there's an increased emphasis required on action plans, but there's also an opportunity to review the syllabus, perhaps to bring it back to a set of fundamental true parts, as opposed to a set of mini techniques that are all just cobbled together. It's a really old teaching approach, actually, back from the 70s, called loose parts theory. So you teach the component parts, and then you teach for them to be brought together in different combinations for different situations. Yeah, but it's a really good point, Alan.
Yeah. Can I just pick up on something? Can I just pick up on something Alan said at the start of his bit on the chat there, which is interesting in combination with what Pete said. And Alan, actually, you didn't mention this when you were chatting then, which was the idea that somebody buys into a course or some expensive equipment, and by definition, they believe that will keep them safe. And a thing that I think is really important for us to be aware of in relation to what Pete was saying a minute ago, is that idea that, do we have somebody whose situational awareness and risk awareness and desire to engage with it is at a high enough level that they understand that just because you're with them doesn't mean they'll always be safe if they're actually lead climbing? I mean, that is your massive decision as a lead coach, isn't it? It's like, when do we take the umbilical cord off? You know, I mean, I think that there's two very big sides to this. It's really important, it's realistic, but it's also important that it matches what the client thinks they're paying for. And striking that balance is always going to be a challenge. I think we're probably, how are we doing, Chris?
Yeah, we're over time, but I think we're okay.
Yeah, I'm more than happy. I'd rather talk about this than go back to what I was doing.
Go on, Pete. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. It was just that I think if I'm working in this context, I'm one of my big things is whether I'm leveling, you know, and whether I'm empathetic. So that's one of my primary concerns. So that obviously the whole range of techniques and the circumstances are very important. But am I going to be infected? You know, can I make a connection? Can I get through? And on the other side of that would be how observational am I? You know, looking at, you know, usually you can see an accident coming, I would always sort of say. That, and if you don't stop it, did you at least see it, if you see what I mean? So I always think that's the context, that you should be able to kind of predict what's happening by looking at everybody's faces, listen to what they're saying, and almost like, I think when I'm working with people, I'm trying to say, well, literally, you are looking sometimes it's every few seconds, you're scanning and scanning and scanning. And I know I work with other instructors at times, and it's one of the things that I find quite sometimes lacking in some instructors. They can tie the ropes up well and all the rest of it, but they're not really looking at the group so much. It's just a by the by. And so I'm thinking, well, one of my central ways of staying safe and trying to be effective is leveling. In other words, working out, do we all agree with what we're up to today and what we're trying to do, and trying to understand the people. And on the other hand, am I really watching what's going off and, you know, really imagining what could happen and what can't happen without being hyper, but just naturally picking up all day long type thing. So for me, that's my central tool, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
It's a really
all good coaching, putting the client at the centre of the model.
Yeah.
It kind of flags the idea of having an emotional intelligence rather than just a technical ability, doesn't it? You know,
absolutely.
Yeah,
being able to work with people.
You'll end up doing what's appropriate. If you're doing that, you'll do what's appropriate. Absolutely. Sam's just put that here. There we go. Brilliant.
Good.
Thanks very much, everyone.
I was going to say that any final questions before we just wrap up? Okay, can I ask you to just click the slides on, please, Loel? So yeah, while we're doing that, just to say huge thanks to Loel and Dave and to everybody here for giving your time this morning. So we really hope it's helpful, and please do give us feedback on this and the other sessions. That's really helpful for us. The sessions will be going on. We've got a few more, and hopefully you can see on the screen coming up. We have 2 next week. We have the one from Ollie, editor of Trail magazine, who broke his leg just before he was due to do the last delivery. So he's going to be presenting that next Tuesday, 28th. And then we have Alan, who's in the room here today, who will be doing his session on the same time next week, same time as today. So we'll look forward to those. So if you haven't already, please sign up and do look out for the last few webinars that we'll be hosting in this series. So apart from that, many thanks. We hope it's been helpful. Just a reminder, we will post Loel's research for you, so you will have access to that, and then you can send him all your comments and feedback, and we'll look forward to a future webinar along with some further research at some point. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, folks. Hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.